Miles of flat golden sand along the seafront have brought holidaymakers in their thousands to Weston-super-Mare since early Victorian times. It's grown from almost total obscurity, and they even say it's the largest and liveliest resort today between Lancashire and Land's End. It's certainly lively, and every year something like 3 million people come to Weston, some for their annual holiday, some, like us, just on a day out. I remember my father telling me that the first time we went to the seaside on the train after the war, I announced to all and sundry in the railway carriage that as soon as we got there, I was going to jump straight in off the bank. Well, I didn't know what the seaside was. All I remembered was our canal at home. Well, you can't make that mistake at Weston. Look at it, miles and miles and miles of sand. It's what the town's famous for. And from May to October, Weston is in business, the holiday business.
We come from Leeds. We've just come on a tour, and it's the first time we've ever been here. You know, looking forward to it, and we're really enjoying it.
I came from Birmingham. The reason is that Weston-super-Mare is nearest to Birmingham. First reason, and the second is it is cheaper than the other seasides.
And of course, it's a paradise for children. The sand, the sea, buckets and spades. But Weston welcomes everyone, really. Mum and Dad, Granny and Grandpa, Auntie Doris, honeymooners. It's just Weston Super Seaside. For generations of children, Weston means donkeys. In the old days, the postman and the town crier and the fisherman all rode one. They worked in the town before they ever gave rides to the children. Today, almost all the donkeys on Weston Beach are owned by Don Tracknell's family. How far back does your ownership of the donkeys on the beach here at Weston go, Mr. Tracknell?
It's about 155 years now.
Really?
Yes.
Same family all the way?
Same family all the way along, yes.
How did it start in the first place, then?
Well, a long time ago, they used to use the donkeys for going out getting fishing now.
Oh, I
It
see.
gradually developed in from that to donkey rides.
It isn't just donkey rides these days, though, Mr. Tracknell, is it?
Oh, no. We do such things as donkey derbies now, which is one of the most popular sports in the country.
Oh, yes, your famous racing donkeys,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, they are. They're great. They're the fastest in the country.
What about their names?
Well, we've had them named after all the royalty, film stars, television personalities. We have them named after Harvey Smith at the Australia show. Oh, you mentioned them, we've had them named.
And the children obviously enjoy it, don't they?
Well, you just watch their faces when they come back. It's real, you know. They get on a donkey, and you can't explain that. You've actually seen their faces and see how they like it. And if a kid has got any money in their pocket, you bet your life they'll all go on donkeys.
So who could blame anyone for thinking that all there is to Weston on a fine day is sand, sea, ice cream and donkey rides? Well, you'd be wrong, because there's much more in Weston than meets the eye. So if you want a little bit more out of your day out than sand in your shoes, or you can't stand the sight of another stick of rock, then you could come here to the museum. You'll get some peace and quiet away from the crowds on the front, but you can also start discovering some of the really interesting history of Weston-super-Mare. Now, they've fitted this place rather nicely into the old Gaslight Company workshops and stores. Well, stores may seem an unlikely setting for a museum, but here this clever little spot of conversion means that you can potter amongst the palms while soaking up echoes of Weston's past. There's this old dentist's chair, a great favourite with the children who love to peer at all the grisly implements. I bet they forget their toothache looking at all that. Tucked away in a little corner, there's a dairy filled with all the trappings needed to make that rich Somerset cream and butter. Items, I suppose, that get curiouser and curiouser as the years pass by. There are reminders, too, of Weston's genteel past, when everyone was properly dressed and there wasn't a plastic mac in sight. And the whole family had to be well turned out for that important part of any holiday, the promenade along the promenade. So how did it all start? Why did Weston-super-Mare become such a happy holiday land? I must admit, when you look along the seafront today, it's hard to imagine that it was once a tiny community with small cottages and fishermen's dwellings. Slowly but surely, Weston began to gain in popularity and to thrive as a resort, something that was truly amazing as it had all the drawbacks of a large estuary. Then, as now, the tide could disappear almost out of sight, but people still packed the beach and paraded their Sunday best. Weston began to acquire a reputation amongst the doctors of Bath and Bristol and amongst the wealthy public, those people who could afford to travel here, although they didn't really have much more to entertain them apart from sand and sea and sunshine. But then the next most important event in Weston's history was only just around the corner. Because the local landowners distrusted the noisy and smoky railway, the Bristol to Exeter main line swept past Weston and left its visitors to change trains in the middle of nowhere. That was all rectified by June 1841, when it became one of the first seaside resorts in the world to receive a rail link. And they flocked to Weston, for on the very first cheap day excursion from Bristol, no less than 2,000 people couldn't wait to get there. The railway opened up the coastline completely, and the impact was immediate. It came to Weston at a time when the middle classes of the Victorian era were growing in prosperity, and they were able to copy their social superiors by taking a holiday by the sea. It was this solid middle-class support that was to be the foundation of Weston's future. They arrived at the seaside with all the enthusiasm of small children today, although the facilities they found were somewhat different. Those extraordinary bathing huts and machines were all along the beach, giving all the privacy and protection in the world to all those shy young ladies. The modern holidaymaker has no such worries. For some, happiness is a solitary sunbathe, and for others, a day in a deck chair. For many, on a hot summer's day, you can keep your Mallorcas and your Costa del Sols. It's Weston every time. I suppose these days we're pretty unself-conscious about flaunting our bodies on the beach. But in 1872, the now world-famous diarist, Francis Kilvert, paid a visit to Weston. He was still a young curate, and he wrote about a sort of revolt against decorum which spread like wildfire along Weston Beach. He bathed at first with decorum from a bathing machine, but then an extraordinary change took place. Wednesday, the 4th of September. Many people were openly stripping on the sands a little further on and running down into the sea, and I would have done the same, but I had brought no towels of my own. Seems those fusty, heavy Victorian clothes were getting the better of everyone on a hot day. Kilvert at last threw caution to the winds himself. Thursday, the 5th of September. I was out early this morning before breakfast, bathing from the sands. There was a delicious feeling of freedom in stripping in the open air and running down naked to the sea, where the waves were curling white with foam, and the red morning sunshine glowed upon the naked limbs of the bathers. Who said the Victorians were straight-laced? It's also unmistakably British, from the sandcastles that the children seem to make for hours on end, to the pavement cafes and the endless cups of tea and glasses of pop. For many people, Weston's overriding attraction is that it's flat. You can occupy yourself for an entire holiday without puffing or panting anywhere. But for those who fancy a small bit of exercise and enjoy finding spectacular views, then to the north of the town, there's just the very thing for you. Well, they do say that Weston's good for the health. Certainly makes you breathe. These steps are worth coming to find. They wind down the hillside just above Sand Bay. Beautiful view over there. But they're supposed to be made by the monks in medieval times as a shortcut from their priory. Rather a nice picture, I think, to think of them in their brown habits, chiseling away at these steps. But the other story is that they were made for the vicar of Kew Stoke, so that he could climb easily up the hillside from his parish in Kew Stoke, of course, to another parish at the top of the hill. Whichever way you like it, it's a nice climb. Much of the land overlooking Weston was owned by one family, the Smith Pigots. They were the lords of the manor and largely controlled the development of Weston. The solid but elegant residences were built with profit in mind, for family groups from the middle and professional classes of Bristol and Bath would rent rooms or whole houses for themselves and a few servants. Often they would stay for the whole summer season, joined for shorter periods by the head of the household. In smaller numbers came the individuals seeking a cure for their ailments, and even the physicians needed somewhere appropriate to stay. The houses built with them in mind now provide the mainstay of Weston's hotel accommodation. I think I must be a bit of a glutton for punishment. I've been informed by people who live round these steps that when you go up them, you count one lot, and when you come down, you arrive at a different figure. Well, I believe there are 172, and I'm coming up here to try and find a different side to Weston's character, one that goes right back into the dim and distant past. That is, if these steps ever end, I'll get there. The acres of woods on Welbury Hill were planted with a purpose in mind, to entice and delight all Weston's visitors. Well, it was a beautiful walk through the woods there from the top of the steps. But now I wonder if you could guess where I am now. Look at these extraordinary piles of stones. And what it is the remains of an Iron Age hill fort, one of a chain that once stretched along the northern edge of Mendip. The hilltop had commanding views and was easily defended, and it had the added advantage of spring water and a large area of land suitable for cultivation. The ramparts enclosed 10 acres and sheltered many hundreds of people. But then the pattern of life came to a sudden and violent end. In the 1st century AD, the fort was attacked, probably by the Romans, and the bodies were thrown into these pits. One of the skulls they dug out had no less than 7 sword cuts in it. Well, probably demoralized by this, the fort was abandoned by the people, and they went to farm on the lower slopes of the hills nearer the present town. Today, those lower slopes have been put to a different use, for it's here that you find the really colourful side to the town. There are countless people who come to Weston purely to visit its parks and to enjoy the peace and real tranquility they have to offer. Weston's flowers have gained commendations in the Britain in Bloom competition, and maybe that certain joie de vivre about the parks here is because the man who plans all the displays is a Frenchman, Claude Rioux.
French gardening, French horticulture, combined with British or English horticulture, I think at the end you got a beautiful dish. In other words, you got a good menu on the...
All right, then, well, what about the gardens that you look after in Weston-super-Mare? What's your planting philosophy, if I can call it that? How do you decide what kind of flowers to put in a public garden?
Well, we plan for the public. We plan for the visitors and, of course, for the residents. And we try to, obviously, plant such flowers that will flower for months. In other words, we plant flowers now and we want them to go on up to the first frost.
You can't help seeing, of course, that parts of Weston, because it's a seaside resort, tend to be rather garish. They've got to sell their ice creams, they've got to get people into the pier and so on. So you're bound to have that aspect of things. Do you feel that your flowers tend to help to soften that a little?
Yes, definitely. Because you see, if you go in the park now, you will see quite a few people sat on the seats and so forth, children playing. And I think the parks complete Weston. Actually, I would say the parks really, if you go abroad, for instance, if you go to the States, to France, to Belgium, the first thing one does, sends a postcard back home. And it's often a postcard showing some flowers, a park there. So it means basically that the parks play a big and important role in society. They always have done, actually. I think that they add up to the quality of life.
Well, this year, some 90,000 plants have been cultivated in the nurseries and worked into designs to delight the eye. There are flowers everywhere, on the seafront, alongside the main roads, but most of all, of course, in the parks themselves. Fountains and flowers in the foreground and splendid distant channel views complement each other in Prince Consort Park. It's a bit of a climb, but it's really worth the effort, for it's from here that you can see the islands out there in the bay. Steepholm, called that because it's steep, lies 5 miles off Weston-super-Mare. Its cliffs drop dramatically, and from the top you can see the entire Bristol Channel from Lundy to the Severn Bridge. Once a refuge for Viking marauders, today it's an island nature reserve for thousands and thousands of birds. There are boat trips out to the island. Its neighbour is also aptly named. It's called Flatholm, and its lighthouse is a marker for shipping in the channel. Paddle steamers are a rare sight these days, but when sea trips were all the rage, then a whole fleet of boats such as this would ply up and down the channel, passing the islands and bringing people to sample the delights of Weston-super-Mare. A steamer called the Waverley was launched in 1899, and this one, built in her memory, is similar in many ways. Paddle steamers from Bristol, South Wales and other points of the compass brought thousands of people, and it was quite usual to see 7 or 8 of these magnificent boats circling in the bay, waiting to offload their passengers. Today there's still a good selection of boat trips available in Weston, but the days when the quayside thronged with boats and passengers went long ago. Small ferry boats have now taken the place of those majestic turning paddles, but perhaps a trip on the Brine is still the best way to get a good look at Weston's islands and its piers. To the north of the bay lies Burnbeck Pier, known affectionately in these parts as the Old Pier. Because the channel has one of the highest tides in the world, ships could never berth easily alongside the wharf, and Weston desperately needed a landing stage well out into the water. This small island just off the coast gave them the answer, and they simply built an iron bridge and joined the island to the mainland. In its heyday, an electric tramway was laid along the pier, and the magnificent funfair built at the end gave hours of fun to all Weston's visitors. Its air of neglected gentility is its real attraction today. Years ago, that tiny island of Burnbeck was the base for the local fishing industry, and what they did was to stretch rows of nets on long poles along the causeway in between the island and the mainland so that the fish would be caught in the nets on the incoming tide. But then when the fishermen went to collect the fish at low water, they had competition. The competition came from the seagulls, who, if you gave them half a chance, would pinch half the catch. And so that's where the gull yellers came in. And the gull yellers were men who were employed to stand on the rocks and shout and yell to scare the gulls away. Get off! Shoo! Scat! Well, who's to say who won in the end, the gulls or the fishermen? Today, Weston's fishing industry is still in existence, but it's only 2 men and their boat. After 50 years as coxswain of the local lifeboat, Alfie Payne, with his son, takes his nets out into the bay and then sells his haul daily in the centre of Weston. It's hardly on a par with a highly mechanised trawling industry, but it's probably just about as commercial as everyone wants it to be. And Alfie catches his fish in exactly the same way as they have done for generations. Alfie, this is a daily fishing trip for you, is it?
Yes, it is, yeah. We go when the weather's reasonable.
Yes. Is there anybody else doing fresh fishing in Weston today?
Not commercial like we are.
So you are Weston's fishing industry now?
Oh, the only one.
Just you, your son and your boat?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, what have you caught today?
Well, you can see the catch here on the...
Yes.
There's one basket there, and there's another one getting filled up. You got another net there to clear, look.
What are they then?
They're dabs. Flounders, what they call flounders.
Yeah.
They're sort of species of plaice after the same breed as a plaice, like.
And where do you find them?
We find them down on we fish the mud flats. I got 2 nets here, about 110 yards long each, and we run them down level with the shore, and then wait till the tide to put them in about 10 foot of water, and wait for the tide to lower out, and we pick them up on about 2 foot of water.
There's quite a lot here, quite a big catch. How many fish have you caught?
Well today.
How many dabs have you caught today?
Well, you have to count them, but I expect there's 120 pound here more.
So what's the average weight of these dabs you catch then, Alfie?
Well, I should imagine they're getting on for about £1 each. Most of them are about half a pound. And the big ones are going £1 pretty well.
And people like them, do they?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
So, weather permitting, and always providing the tide is right, the odds are that on a day out in Weston, you'll see the local fishing industry in action. Not far along the sea front, we find something that, for all intents and purposes, looks like another pier, but it was built up from a natural causeway of pebbles in the late 1820s. With the sea wall, it made a harbour where the fishing and pleasure boats were moored. It's somehow hard to imagine that coalers also used to berth here as part of the commercial traffic that used the little harbour. This is Nightstone, the focal point of the seafront in the 19th century. Countless paintings, prints and photographs testify to the fact that it was the popular area at that time. Here, Weston's most important medicinal ventures began. Plunging and warm baths were available, dry, hot and vapour baths medicated with sulphur, iodine or chlorine, and even the superintendent was instructed in the process of shampooing. With all that, plus the sea breezes, what illnesses could possibly survive? With all the entertainment and the facilities, to the excursionist and the holidaymaker, it was the ideal place. But the people of Weston felt there was still something lacking. See, the problem was that the trippers would arrive at Burnbeck Island in the steamers, and then they couldn't be bothered to come all the way into Weston to spend their money. And at the same time, trippers would come from Bristol by train, come to the middle of Weston, and not go any further to spend their money. They certainly wouldn't go all the way along to Burnbeck Island. And so something had to be done, and the only solution was a new pier. Weston's Grand Pier was opened in 1904, and they were determined it would be the longest in the country, 1.5 miles, twice as long as it is now. A theatre housed 2,000 people, and top musical and comedy shows packed them in. From an open-air bandstand, the music of famous Viennese orchestras and military bands floated across the water. But then disaster struck. In 1930, a serious fire destroyed the theatre and a lot of the decking. But the pier had become such an essential part of Weston's seafront scene that it just had to be rebuilt, but not quite to its former glory. Originally, it had extended out beyond the theatre, but now it ends on the spot where the theatre was. And in place of the old-time music hall, there's a more instant form of entertainment. Almost a world away from the funfair, to the south of Western Bay and yet still within sight of the Grand Pier, we find Uphill, a village that ours to discover is very aptly named. Well, I don't know. I thought I was coming to Weston-super-Mare for a quiet stroll along the prom. All I seem to be doing is hiking up hills. And the whole point of this climb is to visit the ancient church of St. Nicholas. But why build a church at the top of such a steep slope and so remote from everywhere all around? Well, one story is that it was built by a wealthy seafaring family who wanted it to serve as a landmark for mariners out there in the Bristol Channel. There is another myth, though, that it was the doing of the patron saint of sailors, St. Nicholas. Now, the legend is that when the local people tried to build the church at the foot of the hill, someone, probably St. Nicholas himself, removed the stones to the top of the hill each night. In the end, the stonemasons took the hint and built the church where St. Nicholas obviously intended it should be built. The old windmill, like the church, also seems so isolated from everywhere, but years ago it was surrounded by growing crops and the grain was milled here. The Victorians made the mill into an observatory where they could see the Polden Hills, Exmoor and the Welsh Hills.
All right, I'm coming.
It's a long walk up there, isn't it? You know, when you're at the end of a long day out and your feet are just about dropping off, it's very nice to find a bench placed just right so you can sit and admire the view and watch the sun sinking down over Western Bay. This one is rather nice because it's in loving memory of Henry Alfred Jones and Lizzie Jones, presumably man and wife, because it goes on to say they spent many happy hours here, and I'm sure a lot of other people have too. So, thank you very much, Henry and Lizzie. I don't mind if I do. Whew.